and welcome to Hear My Voice podcast planted in Kona Face Center in Captain Cook, Hawaii. Our purpose is drawing families deeper to God.
Hello, welcome. It's your host, Lexi and Emmerich, and today we have a special guest. Why don't you tell us, Richard, a little bit about yourself and what you do at Kona Face Center?
Hi, I'm Richard. I've been at Kona Faith Center for about 12 years now. I help out sometimes with the sound, most of the times with worship, playing guitar, doing the youth, kind of various stuff here and there.
Yeah, thank you. So, you recently did a sermon called The Love Factor, and you can find the original on YouTube. And will you just give us a little summary, a short summary of what that message was about?
God was speaking to me about how we can do like so many different things, how we can be involved with so many different ministries and participate in so many different events. But if we don't do it with the love of God in us, then all of that work just produces nothing. It's just like a product of nothing. And what is love? It's loving God. So, like obeying his commands and then loving on others.
Yeah, perfect. One part I wanted to highlight was your example of multiplying by zero. And if you don't have love, how it's, whatever you multiply by, it's nothing, which kind of backed up with scripture, but I thought that was a really good example.
Thank you.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add into that?
Well, it's just the way that God works with me through my messages or the messages that he gives me, so to say. The thing that I always ask the Lord, like, oh, what do you want me to preach about? He usually gives me like either some kind of like object or kind of like a visual. In this case, he gave me math. So he showed me like, okay, so you have a number, you multiply it by zero, the thing is still zero. The same thing happens when you apply love to it. If you do apply love, there's a value to it so that it produces something. But if there's no love in it, it produces zero and it produces nothing.
Yeah, when you do things with authenticity and with love, when it comes from within, people can really feel that and sense that. So I think that's a really good point, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Richard, while you was preparing this message, did he give you the title before the message or while you're preparing the message?
I think he gave it to me while I was preparing the message because at first he was giving me that equation. And then afterwards, when we kind of went through all the scriptures, talking about math terms again. So, like the factor of something, which is like what you multiply by. So that's where the love factor came in. Which kind of sounded like a love show, like one of those like romantic shows at first. So I'm like, that's a very interesting title. So that's why I wanted to clarify. I was like, it's not that kind of love factor.
Will you walk us through what were you doing when God kind of brought this message to you?
This message, I think, was about at least a year ago, a year and a half, maybe. At the time, I don't remember what caused me to go into this kind of message, but something that recently happened this past week, or this past month, I should say, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, that really brought me back to this message. Because we think that the things that we do has to be like tied into like the church stuff, giving out a message or being on the worship team. That's like the one ways we can contribute to serving the Lord. But there's other ways too that we don't think of. One example that I'm thinking of is when I was making ube cupcakes for the bake sale for the car wash. This was for the youth ministry last year, so it was quite a while back on this one too. But I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna make cupcake and I'm gonna drop them off at the church. They can sell them. And those people that come to Kona Face Center know that the Ubi cupcakes are really good. It's one of my favorites. But something touched me last week or the week before. It was the Passover dinner. So I think it was 2 weeks before because we were prepping for the Lao Lao this past Wednesday. Anyway, Auntie Maxine brought in a couple to me. They came to the youth car wash fundraiser the last time we had it, which was like a year ago. That's when we were selling the cupcakes. They asked like, "Oh, who made the cupcakes?" And I was like, "Oh, Richard did." And so like, "Oh wow, we got to meet this guy." And so they came to the Passover dinner a couple weeks ago, So I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Like, I didn't realize that something like baking cupcakes could bring someone in.
Yeah, using your gifts and talents. I think that's one primary way that I see God move in my life is just through gifts and talents and baking. Everybody loves food around here. So that's an awesome testimony and story.
That's one of the awesome things about Kona Faith Center too, is that like there's so many like different foods that people bring, so many different types from so many different cultures.
I'd even go as far as saying that's how some people show love is by giving food and eating food. Meals bring people together. I know it's one way I feel connected to people that I love.
Yeah, definitely.
Richard, I like how you broke down the Ten Commandments. How you had the first four is how we show God love
Yeah.
personally, yes, and then the other
So the first,
six is how we can love other people. Can you expound more on that?
yeah, so kind of like looking at like how the Ten Commandments work. So like the first four kind of relates to God. So putting God first above all else. He wants to be first in our life. He doesn't want to take any other position. And the second one is to not engage in idolatry. And basically, idolatry is anything that you put above God. So, like, if God's second place and something else is first place in your life, that thing is your idol. And the third one is like not using the Lord's name in vain. So, not saying like, oh my God, really loosely. And the fourth one is just like honoring the Sabbath. So, spending that time to rest and to acknowledge God for who He is. And then the second half, so like 5 through 10, is like regarding to other people. So like 5 is regarding into your parents. So you want to honor them, you want to respect them. 6 onwards is like how we interact with other people. So we want to treat others the way God wants them to be treated. I call it the platinum rule because there's the golden rule, but then there's one higher above that as the platinum rule.
That's great, Richard.
It kind of reminds me too of the love is patient, love is kind. And then, it tells just a little bit about what love is, and then it expounds a lot more on what love isn't. And that kind of stood out to me too. It's one of my husband and I's favorite verse.
Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. I like the part that like it says it keeps no record of wrongs. You know, like how some relationships, and I'm not necessarily talking about like husband and wife kind of thing. It also can be like between coworkers or between two friends or something. It's like you don't want to be that one person that's kind of like, oh, you remember did this wrong, did this wrong, did this wrong, or like when did I ever do that? It was like June 5th, 1995 or something.
Yeah, letting it pass, forgiveness. It's a big one in relationships in general, I'd agree. So, Richard, what is something that the audience can take away from the love factor and apply to their life today?
The one thing that people can take away from this is to how to love God. Like we explained in the video, to love God is to obey his commands. How do we find his commands? Through the word. And then also having that harmonious relationship. So learning to agree to disagree at times and kind of being supportive and caring for each other, loving to help others to live God's way. So like encouraging them in their walk. And I think by doing those two things, whatever else that we do, whether it's worship or whether it's baking or whether it's teaching the youth, all different kinds of stuff, whatever that we do, if we have that love factor into it, it produces something. But without love, multiplying by zero produces nothing.
Yeah, I really like that practical example. Like we talked about earlier, the baking and just those simple things that we do showing love. I like that. Trying to think of, 1 degree for myself, but I'd really like to get personal with you, Richard. What does the application of this message look like in your life today?
For me, the perfect example would be patience. You know, kind of like patience with dealing with other people. Like, for example, with taking care of my parents, got to work out their schedules. And sometimes it clashes with things that you're trying to do. Having the patience for that and not losing your cool with them because you know that you love them. It's just some of the things that they do sometimes is kind of like pokes you and pushes you and tests you. And then also working with other people. So, like, for example, with the Lao Lao setup last week, we had a little bit of problems with the meats. We had to go run back to the store to try to return some of the spoiled meat and then come back. It really can produce a lot of stress, especially when it's your closing time. But thankfully, everybody was able to work things out. Nobody really shouted at each other, well, except for me, but it didn't make it through the phone. So, and then also being patient with God, because He works things on His terms, not our terms. He works the things on His time, not our time. Understanding that and understanding He's going to work everything out. It's just that there's some stuff that He wants us to go through to build our character, and having that patience really helps with not lashing out at God and stuff.
So for myself, I'm usually always busy. I have a busy life once in a while. Each of us here, we all have our own busyness in this life. We all got stuff going on. So what is like 3 steps, simple 3 steps that we can do in our busyness of life that we should do that produces love?
I think Pastor kind of explains this a lot in like camps and sermons and stuff. But I think one big thing is planning your work and working the plan. One thing that he showed me is like doing the ideal week. So kind of like plotting out when I work, when do I want to set up workout, feeding the dog, taking care of shower time, bath time, all that stuff. Just kind of have those planned out first so that you kind of have like a set day in place. So if something else kind of comes in your way, you can check your schedule, and if something's in there, then you might have to work things out a little bit. But having that pre-planned set will kind of help you in making the decisions. Because it's okay to say no sometimes, and that's the one big challenge for me is I'm kind of like the yes guy, but then you can't say yes to everything because you're one person. And if you try to do like 3 different things, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna come out pretty. Step 2, spend some time with God when you're having those times of frustration. You're going to have those moments of frustration, whether it's frustration with your parents or your friends, or that the doctors aren't getting the right prescription order, getting all the appointment dates mixed up. It's very easy to kind of get flustered, but I realize now, like during the quiet times I have with him, he kind of puts things back together and just kind of reassures me that everything is going to be okay. I would say the third is to have that quality time with other people. I'm usually kind of like one of those like shut in people, so I usually don't like going out. I just kind of like staying at home. Sometimes I get invited to birthday parties and stuff like that. Sometimes I'm a little hesitant, like I'm not sure if I want to go because then it's going to be late and then I have to work the next day. I gotta go to bed and do all these things on the Saturday. But most of the times I'm just like, okay, let's go. Let's have some fun. Let's get out of the house and have some fun with some friends. And I've never regretted a single time that I went out to have some fun with friends at church. Whether it's Connie Kapila night or someone's birthday party or even one of the youth or young singles events. Each time I never regretted going.
Yeah, I really like all three of those, Richard, but the last one really resonated with me as well because, we have to spend time with people and build those relationships in order for the love to flow through and loving others. The one-on-one time with God is where we get to, embrace his love that he has for us. And then when we spend time with others, we get to pour that out onto others as well. And for me, in my busyness, I have to really schedule in my hanging out with friends time, which is kind of funny, but really, if I don't write it into my ideal week, it doesn't typically happen. And so, yeah, that's a really big one that I've been working on myself. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Richard? Any additional comments?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for tuning in to listen.
Remember, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love.
Mahalo for tuning in to Hear My Voice podcast today. We encourage you to spend a few minutes as a family to talk and reflect on how you can live Pono with these ideas.